let's continue.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. White, prior to the lunch adjournment, you dealt with the memorandum dated the 9th of May 2005
Can you switch on your mic? Thank you.
From Mr. Shabalala at Bundle C, page 1116. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
Now, after that, was there further correspondence between Mr. Shabalala and Mr. Savoy?
There was, Chair.
And do you deal with that correspondence in your report?
I do, Chair. I set out various interactions with them on the pages on the next few pages that follow, Chair.
Then the next significant correspondence appears at page 1125. If we could go to that. And this is a letter from Mr. Shabalala to Gumbi Masilela, dated the 31st of August 2005. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair. That's where I referred to that letter and then copy some extracts of that into my report.
Who was Gumbi Masilela?
Chair, she was the head of department of the KwaZulu-Natal Local Government and Traditional Affairs at the time.
Could you please tell the Chair about this letter and what it stated?
So, Chair, this again appears to indicate that if there was any urgency in this process to procure these water purification plants from Intaka, the only urgency was to spend the money rather than an urgency for the community that needed clean drinking water. And I say that, Chair, because, and I'll quote an extract out of that letter, which is from Mr. Shabalala at paragraph 9.053 at the bottom of that page, and it reads starting at the end of the third line, as we are now approaching mid-year in the financial year, there is a considerable urgency to allocate and expend the funds in question, lest we are left with unspent funds at the financial year end. As this project requires careful investigation and extensive consultation with the municipalities, it would be appreciated if you would update this office as a matter of urgency as the progress to date, if any.
And the progress with what did that refer?
Chair, that is progress with identifying the municipalities that would require these water purification plants and the installation thereof. Because the issue, Chair, there was quite a history to this, but when it came to installing them, you needed to identify an appropriate site with a source of water, with a local municipality that was prepared to pay for the maintenance as well as the chemicals to run the plant. So there were a number of things that needed to be done. It wasn't just a matter of dumping something somewhere and it would just work. So you needed buy-in from up to 20 municipalities to take these plants and have them installed in their areas.
So ultimately, just to explain that, how many of these water purification plants were bought?
So Chair, 20 were bought in the end, and I'll come to the detail later, but in some of them 3 years later they still hadn't been installed, but they were bought on the basis that it was an emergency.
And why was emergency utilized?
Chair, in my view, the sole purpose of that was to avoid going out on a competitive tender process. There could be no other reason.
Then if we could go to page 1127.
So, Chair, on that page, in the middle, I referred to the meetings of the interdepartmental task team that were held in September and October of 2005. Chair, because this installation of these water purification plants now involved more than one department, because Provincial Treasury was pushing or motivating the idea, they were arranging for the money to be reallocated from the Poverty Alleviation Fund to the Department of Local Government. Local government needed to identify the communities where they would be installed, and then economic development was also involved, because there was an initial thought that Taka would set up a construction facility in KZN to build these plants, a manufacturing facility. So as a result, they set up this task team of the three departments to try and manage and sort out all the logistics of procuring these. And again, Chair, I just want to refer, and in the fourth line of paragraph 9.058, I state, it must be noted that even at this early stage, the only emergency seemed to be the need regarding the funding for this project, with the following being stated in the minutes. There was extreme urgency to finalize this project, given the fact that 6 months of the financial year had already lapsed, the adjusted estimate was just around the corner, and a decision regarding the funding needed to be made soon. So, Chair, not an urgency or an emergency that the communities don't have clean drinking water, but rather the need to spend the money.
Then, if we could go to page 1133, and the joint memorandum dated the 10th of October 2005 referred to in paragraph 9.068.
Chair, just for the record, if I could make 2 corrections to that paragraph. In that paragraph, in the third line, I referred to the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Local Government. Chair, it should be the MEC in both instances. It shouldn't be the Minister. Chair, that is a memo that was issued jointly by Mr. Shabalala, the head of the Provincial Treasury, Ms. Gumbi Masalela, the head of Local Government and Traditional Affairs, and I think it's Ms. Papuma, the acting head of Economic Development. That memo was addressed to Dr. Mkhize as the MEC of Finance and Economic Development, and Mr. Mabaya Kulu as the MEC for Local Government and Traditional Affairs. That memo is titled Proposal to Allocate 43 million rand.
It's, I'm sorry, Mr. White.
Yes, Chair.
It's Mabuya Kulu.
I will-
It sounded like you were saying Mabaya Kulu. I may have misheard you.
Thank you, Chair. I will try and get it
Mabuya Buya Kulu.
correct going forward.
Shouldn't
Thank
be
you, Chair.
difficult.
I'm from KZN, Chair, so I've got no excuse. The proposal to allocate 43 million rand from the Poverty Alleviation Fund to the Department of Local Government and Traditional Affairs to purchase Wataka water purification plants.
Okay, if you can stop here. The memo that we spoke about before the lunch adjournment referred to a figure of 22 million. How have we now got to a figure of 43 million?
So in the intervening period, there was a quotation that had been sent to Mr. Shabalala that said it would cost 43 million rand. Other than that, there was no reason for the increase in the amount.
The initial, was there an initial amount which was less than 43 million?
It was 22, Chair, and I referred to it in one of those previous.
Oh, yes, no, I think I remember. I saw that, yeah.
Yeah.
You testified
So
about that.
they've just increased the amount now. Now it's at 43. Chair, it ultimately ends up at 44.5 plus transport of 5.9 million. So it just steadily increases over the time.
And it's never explained how it increased.
No, Chair.
Okay.
But Chair, just to put it into context, the cost, according to the manufacturer of the Wataka, so the entity external to Ntaka that manufactures them, said the delivered cost would be 750,000 rand each. Here they bought 20 for 44.5 million rand each, so 2.2 million rand each, plus there was a further 5.9 million rand transport for the 20. So they effectively paid 50 million rand, close to 2.5 million rand each, and the cost price to Ntaka is 750,000 rand delivered.
Thank you, Chair. If you can then deal further with this memorandum of the 10th of October 2005.
So, Chair, this memorandum effectively summarizes what the departments will do that are going to make this procurement happen and the processes. So the entities identified as Ntaka Investments, and then in paragraph 2 on that page, 1133, the Department of Local Government and Traditional Affairs made a number of comments, including, and then I quote, Chair, accepting responsibility for the project, conducting preliminary investigations, compiling a business plan, and then importantly, obtaining waiver of tender requirements approval from the Central Procurement Committee with the assistance of Treasury, entering into a contract with the supplier to purchase 20 plants at a price of original quotation, and compiling memoranda of agreements with district municipalities prepared to accept plants. So, Chair, one of the key things they needed to do was to obtain a waiver of the tender requirements with the assistance of the Provincial Treasury, of which Mr. Shabalala was the head of, and I'll show ultimately had a significant role in obtaining that waiver. And then if we go to the bottom of the page, what Provincial Treasury made 2 commitments to expedite the project. The first one is transferring an amount of 43 million rand from the Poverty Alleviation Fund to Local Government and Traditional Affairs in the adjustment estimates for the 2005-06 financial year, subject to an approved business plan. And then the second point, ensuring that Local Government and Traditional Affairs obtains Central Procurement Committee approval for waiver of tender procedures. Chair, just at the time in KZN there was all tenders were approved regardless of which department they were by Central Procurement Committees. Each department couldn't approve the acceptance of a tender. It went to this committee, which was chaired by Mr. Shabalala.
So, am I understanding you correctly that he was going to chair a committee that was asked to approve a waiver of tender requirements in respect of a tender that he had introduced to the department and in respect of which he had travelled overseas with Mr. Savoy?
Correct, Chair.
But isn't the position that there was going to be no tender?
No, but Chair, there needed to be a waiver.
Yeah, that's the waiver.
So
yeah.
the waiver goes to the
Yeah.
tender committee to approve
Yes.
that there's no requirement to
Yeah.
have an external third parties quote for it.
Yes, Chair, you're correct. My use of the word tender in that instance was misused. Thank you. Could we then, so this is happening now on the 10th of October 2005, is that correct?
Correct, Chair.
If we could then go to page 1138.
So, Chair, at the top of that page, in paragraph 9.077, I summarize, in fact I quote, from a email that was sent by Mr. Shabalala to Dr. Savoy of Ntaka on the 3rd of November 2005. Chair, and this came from the electronic records of Intaka that had been seized by the South African Police Service. So they made images of computers and then they provided it to us for further analysis. And this was one of the emails identified. It's titled Intaka, and then Hola Amigo. Thank you for the email. I've received it. Thank you also for
I'm sorry, it looks like am I looking at the right place? 9.077, the paragraph.
Correct, Chair, and then the number 1 below that, the sub 1.
Yes, okay, all right.
So I'm referring to an email from Shabalala to Dr. Savoy dated the 3rd of November 2005. And the contents of that email read, Wataka, hola amigo, thank you for the email, I've received it. Thank you also for the tie, it is bright and lovely. I wish to assure you that the province is really doing its best to ensure that by the end of the year there's real progress on this issue.
And this, just for the timeline, this is approximately 3 weeks after the memorandum was addressed, requesting a waiver of the tender requirements.
Correct, Chair, and it's just not the type of email you would be expecting from a head of provincial treasury to a prospective supplier. There was a relationship between the two that was much closer than one would normally expect from an official in this situation.
Then, if you can
Yeah, well, I see that it says hola amigo. I think that some of us will understand that language in a certain way, especially certainly in the townships they will understand it. Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Could you then deal, still on page 1138, with the submission from Gumbi Masalela to the Central Procurement Committee dated the 16th of November 2005?
So, Chair, even although all these decisions had been made, there was then still a need, for want of a better words, to tick the boxes to say it's gone to the Central Procurement Committee and they've decided that there's no need to go out to tender. So effectively grant the tender waiver. The formalities had to be followed through. Chair, this submission, which came from the head of Local Government and Traditional Affairs, it's to request the waiver for the purchase of the water purification plants. And then reading from the 5th line down, a quote from the memo, the entire project can therefore be regarded as a pilot project with major growth potential. As a result, establishing a manufacturing plant in KZN, job creation and skills transfers. So then I go on to say the writer does not include the relevant delegation applicable to the waiver, but concludes it is submitted that the waiver of tender and the placing of an order upon Messrs. Intaka Investments is the only avenue by which the equipment can be procured and payment effected within the time frame of this financial year. Chair, there's absolutely no motivation as to why this is urgent or an emergency.
Yes, I'm just thinking about this waiver issue. I had last year a number of witnesses, particularly from Transnet, where there were issues about tender procedures that had not been followed, and there was a lot of evidence about exceptions when procedures don't have to be followed. One of them, I think, is that if the product you are looking for, or the service or the goods, if there's only one supplier for that product, if I recall correctly. And my query was always, what's wrong with inviting anybody who can provide that? Because if that supply is the only one, then it will be the only one which will respond to the invitation. But just in case there is somebody else that you don't know about who can provide, then they can come up. And that should be good for you as a government entity. But the question that arises is whether this was a situation where Intaka was the only entity that could supply this, because I think the person who is writing there seems to suggest that as a basis for seeking a waiver.
So Chair, if one reads this carefully, they don't actually, nowhere do they say this, they are the sole supplier of this product. What they, in a roundabout way, are trying to get to is to say that Intaka says they will build a manufacturing plant in KZN if you order these as a first step and then order further from us in the future.
Well, I think I was looking at that last sentence. It says, it is submitted that waiver of tender and the placing of an order upon Mrs. Intaka Investment is the only avenue by which the equipment can be procured.
Chair,
And payment effected within the time frame of this financial year.
Chair,
I think I was focusing on the only way in which the plant can be procured.
Chair, the problem is the word "and," because "and" paid for within the financial year. So if they
Yes,
went out
but
to
the
tender, they may not have been able to
Yeah,
pay
but
for
the
it
question I'm asking is whether this plant could be obtained anywhere other than through Intaka, as a matter of fact.
now. Chair, as a matter of fact, there were similar products that could be made, that could be purchased.
That could be,
Yes.
which could do the
They're
job
not
just as
exactly
well.
they're not exactly the same,
Yeah,
but they are similar.
but they do the same job.
Correct, Chair. It's
And
purifying water, Chair. It's not a
Yes,
unique
yes.
thing that they're doing.
So as a matter of fact, it wouldn't have been true to say Intaka was the only one which provided a plant that would do the kind of job that would be used for the purpose for which this one was required.
Correct, Chair. Intaka
Okay.
is not a sole supplier.
Yeah, it was
There are-
not a
there
sole
are-
supplier.
There are other entities, and we did speak to some others in the process of the investigation, trying to work out what a comparative pricing would be.
Yeah,
So that's why I can say, as a matter of fact, there's some similar products out there.
okay. That's helpful.
And did Intaka manufacture these plants?
No, Chair, they were manufactured on their behalf by a manufacturer in Cape Town.
So there was a manufacturer in Cape Town.
The manufacturer in Cape Town actually made stainless steel vats for the wine industry,
Mm.
and effectively they use stainless steel tanks with some pumps and a filtering process that's attached to the stainless steel tank. So
Yes.
they gave the design to them to manufacture for Intaka.
Yes. Thank you.
Yes. And just to digress, pursuant to the chair's point about being the only people who could manufacture these plants, in the course of your investigation, did it ever occur that it was only Intaka that met the bid specifications, and how did that occur? And we'll deal with it in more detail later, but if you can just alert the chair to that.
So, Chair, there were no bid specifications. This was effectively an unsolicited bid that worked its way through the process, starting with Mr. Shabalala and they never went to them and said, this is what we require. It was different with the Oxentaka, where there were bid specifications, but the issue with that is Intaka helped the department set the bid specifications, so they ended up being the only one that was compliant.
Yes.
So that was different, but on the Watakas, there were no bid specifications set.
Okay.
Thank you.
Chair, just to continue with that submission and the approvals that were then given, the approval was not done in a formal meeting. It was done on a round-robin basis. So the submission was sent to all the members of the Central Procurement Committee, where they could write approved or not approved and their reasons. Chair, I set those out on the following page 1139, and what the various comments were by the different members if they wrote a comment. So for Mr. Sipho Shabalala, he merely said approved. He did not declare any conflict of interest. He did not abstain from giving a view. He said approved. Dr. Mbanjwana supported the recommendation. Mrs. Kutsia supported the recommendation, but she made a comment next to her signature which said, more info on how the particular supplier was selected would be useful. So she effectively asked a question. Mr. Conradi supported the recommendation and made the comment, I have no problem with the waiver as an urgent case, but the market should have been tested. Mr. Malloy also supported it with the comment, information provided not entirely satisfactory, however the need and desirability for the project implementation is admissible. And Ms. Ibrahim just said supported. So Chair, 3 of the members, while they supported it, effectively raised queries about the process that had been followed. Chair, that led to some questions effectively in the process that followed. And there were some questions from local government and traditional affairs as to whether this was approved or not and whether further action needed to be taken.
So then if I can refer you to page 1141 and the letter from SCM to Tender Award Committee Department dated the 12th of December 2005 at paragraph 9.9086.
So Chair, based on that submission that had been prepared to the Central Procurement Committee and the comments about supported with various comments attached, there was then a letter prepared by Supply Chain Management and Provincial Treasury, which summarized the outcome of the process. And in that, she stated, the Central Procurement Committee has, by way of round robin, granted approval for the waiver of normal tender procedures for the procurement of 22 mobile water purification plant through the Poverty Alleviation Fund from Mrs.
I'm sorry, where are you reading from?
Sorry, Chair, on the bottom of page 1141, paragraph 9.086.
Okay.
And from the middle of the 4th line in that paragraph. The Central Procurement Committee has, by way of round robin, granted approval for the waiver of normal tender procedures for the procurement of 22 mobile water purification plant through the Poverty Alleviation Fund from Mrs. Ntaka Investments at a total cost of 43,230,000. However, concerns were expressed that there is no problem with the waiver as an urgent, but market price should be tested. So that's an exact quote out of her memo that was prepared. Chair, and I know you asked me just briefly before that about a sole supplier. The difference between what may have happened at Transnet and what happened in KwaZulu-Natal at the time was KwaZulu-Natal had a KZN Procurement Act. So they needed to comply with that act when procuring. And Chair, if one And I've then extracted from that act at the bottom of that page, where I say I examined the KZN Procurement Act, and there's no provision for urgent cases, nor does it detail waivers in such a case. But there's a subsequent KZN Provincial Treasury Practice Note 2 of 2006 that does define urgent and emergency cases when the following criteria have been met. And I'm reading from the top of page 1142. And there's 3 criteria. The duration of invitation of bids would have a material impact on service delivery, community, public, i.e. is of critical importance, resulted from natural disaster, i.e. beyond human control, and immediate action is required to avoid a dangerous or life-threatening situation, misery or want. Poor planning is not justifiable cause of an emergency or urgent situation. Written motivation must be provided, detailing the reasons as to why procurement must be done under circumstances of urgency or emergency. Chair, the submission to the Central Procurement Committee never covered any of those criteria. Chair, while there was never a doubt in anybody that we spoke to that there was a need to provide clean drinking water in the rural areas in KZN, there was no specific emergency identified where it needed to be done now to such an extent that you couldn't follow a procurement process. And Chair, what is interesting is that this process, some 4 years later, some of these watakas had still not been installed. So any justification, even if it was justified as an emergency, you can't justify it 4 years in advance of using it.
Could you then refer to the further letter from Mr. Shabalala to Gumbi Masilela dated the 27th of January 2006, referred to on page 1142, paragraph 9.087?
So, Chair, that's where Mr. Shabalala, as the chairperson of the Central Procurement Committee, there was this letter written where he refers to the waiver of tender, and he notes that there's been slow progress in this key poverty alleviation project and that it is effectively of great concern with the need to commit the funds before the end of March 2006, which is only 2 months from the end of the financial year.
And you say that the fact that only 2 months remains in this financial year seems to be as important to Shabalala as the basic needs of the affected communities.
Correct, Chair. The common thread throughout these meetings and minutes and memos, etc., is the need to spend the money. One would think the starting point would be the need of the community, and the spending the money and the date you spend it by is once you follow the process. Whereas here, it looks like you're more interested in spending the money than actually delivering a service to people.
And what happens if the end of the financial year comes and you haven't spent the money as a department?
Chair, it goes back to the Treasury or to the National Treasury.
So now the further minute referred to on the same page, 1142, of the KwaZulu-Natal CPC meeting held on the 2nd of February 2006. If you could please deal with that.
So, Chair, that meeting on the 2nd of February ratified the decision that had been taken by a round robin. But the minutes for that meeting...
Before you talk about the minutes, I just want to raise something here. You mentioned that the approval of the waiver was not done in circumstances which complied with the criteria, which met the criteria spelled out in practice note number 2 of 2006. That is earlier on the same page.
Correct, Chair.
If the meeting of the KZN CPC was on the 2nd of February 2006, Was that practice note in operation already?
Chair, I would have to check. I don't.
Yeah, because it's quite early, the meeting is quite early in the year. There may well be a possibility that the practice note came after the date of the meeting.
I would have to check, Chair.
Yeah.
But the point being, even if it wasn't spelt out in that practice note, similar provisions appear in procurement policies and procedures throughout the country. So one wouldn't be able to just make up the basis for a waiver.
Yeah, no, I understand that. It's just that if we say they acted in breach of that practice note, the requirements of that practice note, we must just check whether it was in operation or not. You are probably right that there would be some other legislation or policies that would apply, that would prescribe certain requirements. What one doesn't know would be whether they would be exactly the same. I think the last two requirements or criteria, as they call them in the practice note, seem to be quite familiar. They can't be contentious. I think it's the first one that I'm not sure about, whether it would appear in other policies as well, at least the way it is framed.
Take your point, Chair.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Now, Mr. White, in the minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of February 2006, it is stated that the decision had been granted by way of round robin for the waiver. However, concerns were expressed that the market price should have been tested. The minutes were only confirmed and signed on the 2nd of June 2006 by what appears to be Mr. Shabalala. If you could just deal with that, and then what transpired the next day on the 3rd of February 2006.
So, Chair, because of the way those minutes were recorded, indicating that there were concerns about the market price, on the next page I refer to a letter, it's at the top of page 1143, that Gumbi Masalela, the head of local government and traditional affairs, sent to Mr. Shabalala on the 3rd of February 2006. And she questioned whether the market price should be tested, as it was not understood, and whether quotations should be obtained prior to issuing the order to Intaka. So it wasn't clear from the minutes, waiver was approved, but should they now be getting quotations or not? Chair, that document was responded to, not personally by Mr. Shabalala, but by somebody from his office. Chair, and I apologize, the lines aren't numbered, but if one goes down to approximately the middle of the page, say Mr. Shabalala's office then made a similar report to Gumbi Masalela on 13 February 2006 and stated, and I quote, "It is clear that the CPC's reference to the market price should be tested was only meant to refer to the ideal situation which would apply in normal circumstances when time is not an issue and where waiver of tender is not required." As a result of that, and the fact that the minutes were ultimately approved on the 2nd of June 2006, an order was subsequently placed with Intaka for 44 million rand, 44.5 million rand on the 5th of June 2006. So, Chair, effectively, despite the concerns of members of the Central Procurement Committee about the fact that the market hadn't been tested, prices hadn't been obtained, and the process had dragged on now for more than 6 months, the decision was now made to place the order.
But even those members of the committee, they didn't represent that the queries they were raising were of sufficient concern for them to say we can't make a decision until we know about ABCD. They were happy to approve and just provide some comments. If they felt strongly that they were not satisfied, they should not have provided approval.
I agree, Chair.
Yeah, it may be, it comes across as a situation where they were happy to approve, but they just wanted to mention something, you know, and the question is whether really it puts them in any different position to those who just approved without any comments, because they didn't say, I'm approving on condition that the following requirement will be met or something like that.
I agree, Chair.
Yeah, okay.
So effectively, Chair, that whole committee just rubber stamped the approval. It was almost a formality, a process that had been started by Mr. Shabalala some months before. He'd undertaken in the joint memo that Treasury would arrange for the tender waiver. He chaired the committee that now approved it. So effectively he did what he said he would do. I will get the tender waiver. So it was almost like there was no doubt from months before that this would be the outcome.
Yes.
And also his response to the concern raised that the market should be tested was that's only relevant when you're not asking for a tender waiver.
Correct, Chair.
Now, you say that his minutes were then signed on the 2nd of June 2006, and 3 days later the order was placed on the 5th of June. What happened after that?
So, Chair, maybe if I could go back to TSW 19, which is in RR4D at page 1958, that diagram, Chair.
You wanted the diagram to be put on the screen? Okay.
It needs to be TSW 19. So, Chair, that diagram and the piece we've been referring to at the moment is to the top right of that diagram, the Department of Traditional Affairs and Local Government. And the lines I'm referring to are the blue line that flows from the department to Intaka. So there's an order on the 5th of June 2006 for 20 watakas at a price of 44.5 million rand. Chair, there was then some backwards and forwards between Intaka and the department. And Intaka said, this is an ex-works price, Cape Town. If you want the product in KZN, you must pay for the delivery. Suddenly, the department didn't have...
And that was never part of any documentation?
No, Chair.
And how could anybody have thought that there would be an extra if it was not in the documentation?
I agree, Chair. And all along, the funding available had come from the Poverty Alleviation Fund, and it was 43 million. They've now actually spent 1.5 million more than they received from the Poverty Alleviation Fund. And now Intaka says you need to pay for the transport and delivery. So as a result, the whole process delayed by another 6 months. Then on the 5th of November 2006, a further order was placed on Intaka for the transport of 5.6 million rand.
So if the matter was urgent, why did it take so long for the transport to be arranged?
Well, Chair, that's why everything goes against the fact that it was urgent. Chair, then there were some further delays because the department,
So I'm sorry, so the amount now with delivery would have gone up to about
50.1 million. Chair.
50.1 million.
Yeah.
Coming from 22 million.
Correct, Chair.
Yeah. Yes.
Chair, there were then further delays with the delivery because the Department of Local Government couldn't tell Intaka where to deliver them to. And the issue with that was the specific sites and municipalities hadn't been identified.
And if it was urgent, why wouldn't all of those things have been done in time?
So, Chair, when that's the question, that begs the question.
How can you say, how can you take all kinds of measures to say we don't have time even to follow procurement procedures because this is urgent, and yet you don't know where you will put it once it's delivered?
I agree, Chair. But what then happened was the financial year end of March 2007 was now approaching. Plus Intaka was now saying, we manufactured the goods, we want to be paid. If you can't tell us where to deliver them, it's not our fault. The Department
And you can't blame them for that.
I agree, Chair.
At least that part of it. Yes.
An inspection was then allegedly done by Mr. Kun from the Department of Traditional Affairs and Local Government.
By Mr.?
Kun.
Yes.
And he said, I've verified they've been manufactured in Cape Town. And as a result, a payment was then made. So the payment by the department of 44.5 million, so not for the transport, but for the manufacture, was then made on the 5th of March 2007. Chair, I will later refer to where I verified some of these watakas in 2010, and 10 of the 20 were standing on a piece of vacant ground outside of Durban in storage, and the manufacturer's plate that was riveted onto them with the serial number, etc., said they were only manufactured in 2008. So if Mr. Kun verified plants that had been manufactured in February of 2007, it wasn't the ones that came
Yes.
to KZN.
Yes.
It may have been ones that went to the Northern Cape or somewhere else.
Yeah.
They were paying in advance of their plants being manufactured.
Yes. Yes.
And when you did the inspection, were there only 10 plants at that inspection?
So that's correct, Chair. During our investigation, we received information that where some of these plants were being stored, it was just outside of Amanzimtoti, south of Durban. And on the 26th of July 2010, I physically went there with the investigating officer and some members of my team and verified that 10 of the plants were standing there. We took photographs, and Chair, this was more than 3 years after they'd been paid for. They were still now standing uninstalled.
And where they were standing was not the site where they were supposed to be, or was it the site where they were supposed to be but not installed?
So, Chair,
or you don't know?
It was in a industrial park where there are factories around, and this was an undeveloped piece of land.
Yeah, so it was clearly not where they were supposed to serve the community.
No, Chair, it was just land that was rented as storage space for them to be placed on until the sites could be identified.
And what was their condition 3 years after they were paid for?
So, Chair,
Or had they just arrived?
no, Chair, they'd been standing there for some time. You could see they'd been standing there for some time.
Yes.
But they're stainless steel, so they don't rust, but you could just see
Yes.
by looking at them that they hadn't come yesterday. They'd obviously
Yes,
been standing there
yeah.
for some time.
Okay.
But the department, if they were still there 3 years later, obviously viewed no urgency in deploying this to the community that needed purified water or to drink clean water.
So, Chair, I agree 100%. The problem was they couldn't identify the sites to install them. They'd bought something that they now didn't know where to put.
But they, in the memos, in the letters, they projected themselves, that is now government people, officials involved in this thing, projected themselves as being concerned, very much concerned about the needs of the communities which would be helped by these plans. Were these plans such that they could not be installed in the communities where they were required? Well, did they require special kind of environment or what?
Chair, they just hadn't identified the sites. So the initial list...
So they hadn't gone there they'd gone out to the communities and basically have a look?
No, Chair.
Which might suggest when they talked about communities or a community that needed this kind of plant, they may have just been talking in general, not because there was a specific community or there were specific communities which had been identified.
Correct, Chair.
Yeah.
Because one of the initial lists that had GPS coordinates where they should be installed, one of the coordinates was in the middle of a dam, another coordinate was on the top of a hill where there was no water source, and that's why Ntaka said we can't install these, because you can't put them in those sites. So that's the lack of actual thought that had gone through the process, and that's why it took years to eventually install them.
But how do you, as a government official, commit a government department to paying millions of taxpayers' money to get a product that you haven't done your homework about to see how and if it will be used? I guess
So, Chair,
that's not a question really for you, but
the unfortunate thing is the negative inference can be drawn is that it was done because there was a promise of a payment to Mr. Shabalala. So he had negotiated at the beginning, and I'll refer to an affidavit from Dr. Savoy of Ntaka, that he required a donation linked to this procurement. And that's what I'm referring to in that diagram, Chair.
is that the 100 million rand donation?
No, Chair, it's the 1 million rand.
I'm sorry, 1 million rand.
Sorry, before you
Well,
go there.
you can't blame me, Mr. White. I've had evidence here of lots of hundreds of millions, 600 million rands and and billions of rands. So 1 million rand hasn't featured much. Yes.
If we can just go back to the timeline, what date did you say the payment was made to Mr. Savoy's company in Ntaka?
It's the 5th of March 2007.
And what happened 7 days after that payment was effected?
So that's when the payment of R1,053,000 rand was made to a firm of attorneys in Durban called Gaboni and Shezi Attorneys.
I'm sorry, how much was that?
1,053,000.
Oh, okay. That payment was made
7 days later.
about 7 days after the department had paid Ntaka.
Correct, Chair, and that is also referred to on that diagram at TSW 19, where if you look at, you can see there's then a payment made to that firm of attorneys.
Yes.
Chair, maybe to then link that.
Maybe, I'm sorry, Mr. White. We'll come back just now. I just would like us to take a 5 minutes comfort break. We'll just adjourn for 5 minutes. We adjourn.
All rise.
Okay, let's continue.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. White, before the adjournment, we were referring to your diagram, Annexure TSW 19, and you indicated that 7 days after payment was made by the department to Ntaka, an amount of 1053 million was paid on the 12th of March 2007 to Kuboni and Shezi attorneys. Was that paid into a business account or a trust account?
Understanding was paid into the trust account of the attorneys, Chair.
I'm sorry?
To the trust account of the attorneys.
Okay.
And now to explain what then happened to the money, I would like to refer you to the further diagram, Annexure TSW 21, Chair Bundle D, page 1978.
I take it that's in the same exhibit, the same lever archive.
Yes, it's RR4D.
1978, you said?
Yes. It's, Chair, it won't be in that same file. The file that I think you're working with now is C, and this is in D.
Okay.
Sorry, Chair.
Now, we were looking before the break at the diagram, and I'm looking at the file that had the diagram that we were looking at before the 5 minutes adjournment.
Yes, that is the same file. That's the correct file.
Yes.
And
And that is D.
that is D. And we were looking at TSW 19. And we now want to refer to Annexure TSW 21.
At 1978.
Yes, I believe so, Chair.
Okay, looks like I'm about to find it. Okay, thank you.
Now, we know the money, you say, goes into Kuboni and Shezi attorney's trust account. Could you, with reference to document TSW 21, explain to the Chair what then happened to the money?
Maybe before that, are you able to throw any particular light why it was not 1 million rand, it was 1 million rand and the 53,000?
Sorry, Chair?
The amount was 1 million and something, is that right?
Correct, Chair?
Was it 53,000?
Correct, Chair?
Oh, okay. All right. No, it just sounds a little unusual. It looks unusual in my eyes.
Yes, Chair,
Yeah.
and you will in
I
a
will
very
be-
short while understand why perhaps that amount looks
Yes.
like that.
Okay, okay.
So let's
All
first
right,
look
continue.
on this side of the transaction, and then we'll go back. What was this money that was paid into the attorney's trust account? What happened to it? Did you follow the money?
So, Chair, we did. And in that diagram at page 1978, in the box in the middle of that page, I summarize what happened to that money. So that money was then dispersed by the attorneys on the instruction of Mr. Shabalala or his wife to various entities predominantly relating to the operations of his farm. So, Chair, it was used to buy,
To the operation of his
of his being Mr. Shabalala's farm.
farm. Okay.
So, Chair, it was for the community watch, it was to purchase fertilizer, it was to repair a tractor, it was to procure irrigation parts and to repair irrigation systems. And then in the second line of those boxes, Blue Serenity is an entity owned by his wife, and 300,000 rand in 2 separate payments was paid to that entity. So, Chair, effectively what happened, and how it was possible, I can only assume it was because the money earned interest over the time that these payments took place, but 1,056,000 rand was spent for the benefit of Mr. Shabalala and his wife. Chair, and those payments started taking place on the 19th of February 2007. So, Chair,
Would that have been within a few days after Kuboni attorneys
it was
received
a
it?
week, Chair,
Within a week.
within a week.
Okay.
And the money, the final payment
It couldn't have earned much interest while it was with them.
No, Chair, but it was paid out over the next 6 months.
Oh,
So there
okay.
were
Or the first payment
The first
was
payment-
within a week.
Was on the 19th of February, and the
Yes.
last payment was on the 21st of August.
Okay.
So they used this money over that 6-month period to defray their personal expenses on their farm, Mr. Shabalala and his wife.
So, so it was paid out, so to speak, in installments,
In installments,
and it was paid out to the Shabalalas. All the installments were directed either to their accounts or to the accounts of entities associated with them,
well, to entities that they owed money to.
or that they owed money to
So these were effectively suppliers to
the farm.
the farm, to equipment, for repairs, for security, etc. on his farm.
So,
And him or his wife gave the attorneys at Kaboni Shares, the attorneys, instructions on who to pay and how much.
that's unusual,
I
I
agree,
would
Chair.
imagine.
There's
That's-
nothing
that's-
usual about this transaction.
That's unusual. Unless you are, you normally do that for that client, but it's unusual with a kind of once-off payment that you then, just don't pay it to the client, you get directed where to pay by the client. But maybe that's just my experience. It might not be everybody's experience.
So, Chair, based on the facts, the prosecutors allocated to this matter drew the conclusion that this was just a way of laundering a corrupt payment. So it was paid through these attorneys on an invoice that they had submitted to Intaka for legal services provided. So again, why it goes into a trust account and not into a business account is unanswered. But Kaboni Shares, the attorneys, issued an invoice to Intaka, and I'll refer to it shortly. It's a one-line invoice for
Well,
legal
it's-
services rendered.
It is usual for attorneys to receive the money for their services into the trust account and then transfer it to their business account afterwards. So that part is usual. It's easier to account for it if it goes that way, or at least that part is normal, because you can always check first, is there enough money this side, and then go over that side.
But Chair, the allegation here was the services had already been rendered. So it wasn't paid as a retainer.
Yes, no. Even when the service has been rendered, it's quite usual to do it that way. Maybe other firms do it differently, but during my time in practice, a lot of, at least black firms, would receive the money in the trust account, and at the end of the month, when you are supposed to pay your bills, pay your staff, you then check what you have worked for, and then you transfer money from the trust account, because the money in the trust account is the client's money. You transfer it. If you have worked for it, you have entered your fees into your business account, then you pay. You pay yourself and you pay other people. Okay, all right.
Understand, Chair.
Chair, unfortunately, I think that in this instance is entirely theoretical, because is it clear, Mr. White, or is it true, Mr. White, that Mr. Savoy himself deposed to an affidavit where he explained why he had made this payment to these attorneys? And before we get to it, so that we can just make this clear, did he say that any legal services were rendered to him in respect of this payment?
Chair, he said the invoice was arranged by Mr. Shabalala and that this firm had provided no legal services to Intaka.
So was there an invoice that was sent out by this law firm to Intaka?
Correct, Chair.
And for how much was it, if you remember?
1,053,000, Chair.
Exactly the amount.
Chair, maybe if I could refer to the specific invoice.
Okay.
It's in RR4C.
C.
C, Chair, at page 1398.
What page on C?
1398, Chair.
1398. So the invoice is dated 14 February 2007 and is addressed to Dr. G. Savoy, Intaka Investments Pty Limited. And it says, to our fees for work done with the taking of instructions, telephone calls, correspondence, drafting of contracts, consultations, attending meetings, drafting legal opinions, correspondence, and miscellaneous attendances, period 2003 to 2006, and then the total is 1,053,000. Okay, so that is the invoice that was issued by the attorneys.
Correct, Chair.
And you say Dr. Savoy said they never rendered the services that they say in the invoice they rendered.
Correct, Chair.
But you were saying something about Mr. Shabalala and his involvement about this invoice, or?
So, Chair, in that same file where that invoice was actually attached to Dr. Savoy's affidavit, and the affidavit starts at 1386.
On the same
In that
exhibit.
same file, if you go back about 12 pages, Chair.
1386.
86, Chair.
Yes, I've got it.
So, Chair, that some 12-page affidavit is an affidavit that Dr. Gaston Savoy provided to the police. And my understanding is that he came to know that these investigations were taking place, particularly around the 1,053,000 rand, as well as two payments of 500,000 rand to Linda Makwenazi of Romo Investments. And he, my understanding was, in an attempt to try and convince the police that he would cooperate, provided this affidavit. And this affidavit sets out the background to the payment of this payment to Kaboni Shezi attorneys. And Chair, and just to read some of the relevant paragraphs, if I could go to page 1389 at paragraph 14.
If you could just perhaps
1289. 1389.
Correct, Chair.
1389, okay.
Just to put it in context and the purpose of the affidavit, if you could just first read paragraph 5 on 1386.
So, Chair, that's on the first page of the affidavit at the bottom of the page. And it reads, I've been advised that the issues that have been raised and with which I should deal in this affidavit are firstly, a certain donation that was paid by Ntaka in February 2007, and secondly, two commission payments paid by Ntaka to Romo Investments 738 Pty Limited in August 2007. I shall now deal with each of these issues.
Yes, you wanted to go to a paragraph in 1389, at 1389.
It's at paragraph 14, Chair. And he states, in addition, at this time, the question of a donation to the party was also raised, which I understood to refer to the ANC.
Perhaps you should start with paragraph 13, please, to just put that in context on page 1388.
So, Chair, paragraph 13 reads, the issue of Ntaka possibly building a factory in KZN to manufacture water purification and treatment units and create jobs in KZN was also raised by TIC KZN. From the time of our initial discussions. In response, I indicated that whilst we were always supportive of local economic development initiatives, we already had a factory in Cape Town, and a decision as to whether or not to build a further factory in KZN would be based on business considerations such as the number of units ordered. At the time, as I recall, there was some discussion about the possibility of 80 units for one area alone in KZN. And continues at paragraph 14 on the following page. In addition, at this time, the question of a donation to the party was also raised, which I understood to refer to the ANC. As I recall, the person who did so was Mr. Sipho Shabalala, head KZN Treasury, and I was not averse to the idea of making such a donation, as it is a common procedure in any country. However, I did not pursue the matter any further at that time. Paragraph 15 continues, against this background, at Ntaka's costs, I therefore arranged a fact-finding visit to South America, Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro for a delegation from KZN so that its members could see for themselves how both the self-generating oxygen and water purification plants operated in order to assist the delegation in deciding whether the equipment might indeed prove useful in KZN. Chair, Mr. Shabalala was one of those delegates. And then
Yes.
on the following page on 1390 at paragraph 20, against this background, the KZN provincial government, via its Department of Local Government and Traditional Affairs, subsequently purchased 20 Wataka units from our company at a unit cost of 2,228,181 rand 82 cents. The total amount involved was therefore 44,563,636 rand 40 cents inclusive of VAT, and the relevant department contract tender number being ZNT 1426-2005 LS. I have no direct knowledge of the specific procedures followed within the KZN PG in order to purchase the equipment from Ntaka, but I've always assumed that whatever necessary steps steps necessary to be taken departmentally were in fact taken.
Yes, Ms. Wenzel, I think we were looking at the donation and the trip it made. Let's not get out of that track. Let's finish that.
Yes, it is. It will be dealt with. If you could perhaps then go to page 1393, where in paragraph 31 you say you note that the Watakas were finally launched with some publicity by the MEC for the Department of Local Government and Traditional Affairs on the 5th of April 2008, some 2 years after the initial purchase of the equipment. You can then deal with what is said in paragraphs 32, 33, 34, and 35.
So, Chair, in those paragraphs, Dr. Savoy now refers to the donation. And in paragraph 32 he says,
but before that, that paragraph 31 that talks about the launch, this would have been a launch before the sites were identified where these plants would be
well, Chair, they
installed.
installed
They installed some.
Yeah, one or two. So that was the start of the project.
So, okay.
So just before they launched the first one, or installed the first one, it took 2 years. So in 2010, they may have got to 10. There were still 10 left.
Yes.
So over the next 2 years, they installed another 9.
Yes.
But even the very first one took more than 2 years. And that's on Intaka's version.
As far as you know, the last time you knew, what was the position about what ultimately happened with?
Gee, I don't know what happened to the last 10.
Yes. Okay.
Gee, then in paragraph 32, Dr. Savoy goes on to state, be that as it may, when Intaka finally received payment in early 2007, I asked Mr. Shabalala about the issue of the donation to the party, which had originally been raised with right at the outset of the initial discussions in KZN. He informed me that Intaka would be sent an invoice against which we should make payment. I also note that, as a general rule, we make payments for any goods or services only against invoices, and that we had been informed by our professional advisors that we should always obtain documentation in support of payments. Goes on in paragraph 33. Subsequently, I received an invoice from a firm of attorneys called Shezi and Gaboni for an amount of 101,032,000 rand, inclusive of VAT, which invoice was subsequently paid by Intaka. I attach a copy of the invoice and supporting documentation for the payment. He then goes on the following page in paragraphs 34 and 35 to say, I have no knowledge of what happened to this money once it had been paid to the attorneys and do not know whether the party in fact received it. I have no acknowledgement of this. However, I confirm that no legal services, as referred to in that invoice, were ever rendered to Intaka by the attorneys concerned. Although I acknowledge that it is incorrect to have categorized the donation as legal expenses, I am not familiar with the manner in which political donations are sourced and dealt with in South Africa. I merely responded to the directions of Mr. Shabalala in this regard. I feel I should also add that Mr. Shabalala was one of the most helpful officials with whom we dealt with in the KwaZulu-Natal provincial government, and that he has never requested a personal donation for himself from me.
Yes.
So Chair, on Intaka's own version, they link the payment of this 1,053,000 rand to the money they received from the Department of Traditional Affairs and Local Government. So that's not just an inference I'm making that it's the same money. They say it's the same money. The issue of a donation was discussed when we first discussed doing business in the province with Mr. Shabalala. Now that we've received a significant payment, we asked him about it, and he arranged effectively fraudulent documentation from attorneys that didn't provide a service to effectively launder the proceeds of this donation.
Yes.
And Chair, it is my submission that that would explain why the invoice or the amount paid wasn't exactly 1 million rand. The invoice which had been requested by Mr. Shabalala was the amount of 1053 million. And the amount that was ultimately paid to the benefit of Mr. Shabalala was 1056 204.98. It is only that difference, with respect, Chair, that can be accounted for by interest. And it is my submission that the only inference for it being made in that amount is to disguise the fact that it was a round figure million rand and not for legal fees. Now, in your investigations, did you determine whether, we know from following the money from the trust account is used to pay Mr. and Mrs. Shabalala and expenses in respect of the farm. It pays their expenses. That's correct.
That's correct, Chair.
Now,
Sorry. So it came into the trust account of the attorneys, and it went out to Mr. Shabalala's creditors through the same account.
Correct, Chair.
It didn't go via the business account.
Correct, Chair.
Yes. Now, well, maybe later you will deal with it, but I would be interested to know how the attorneys explained not being paid for their services.
They don't, Chair.
They don't.
They were merely following the instructions of Mr. Shabalala.
But they were owed, according to their invoice, a certain amount, and they said if it's for legal services.
It wasn't, Chair.
So they admit that no legal services had been provided.
Correct, Chair. So, Chair, that's why that invoice can't be processed through their business account, otherwise they're going to pay tax on it.
Yes, yeah.
So that's why it stayed in the trust account and never
Yes.
transferred across.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
did you discover whether the
But is there an explanation why they allowed themselves to do something that was clearly wrong?
Chair, there was no explanation. But the one thing that I do know is that they did significant work for the provincial government as a firm.
Yes.
So the only inference I could draw is that
They wanted to
They-
please,
they
they
were
didn't
now-
want to disappoint him.
keeping Mr. Shabalala happy.
Yeah. So if their version is correct, Mr. Shabalala said to them, send an invoice to to Intaga Investments for this amount. Say that you have provided legal services, knowing that they had not provided any legal services. And they did exactly that, also knowing that they had not provided any legal services.
Correct, Chair.
Okay.
And Chair, it doesn't stop there. Did you determine whether the R1 million donation was ever paid to the ANC?
So, Chair, there was, because that was where we understood from the affidavit, it was ultimate.
Switch on your mic again. Thank you.
So, Chair, inquiries were made because that's where the money was ultimately, according to Dr. Savoy, intended to get to. And in that regard, the prosecutor, one of the prosecutors involved in the process early on, the prosecutors changed a number of times, received a letter from Ngabani Wills Incorporated, a firm of attorneys in Pietermaritzburg. And Chair, that a copy of that letter is at TSW 29, which is the last 2 pages in RR4D, Chair.
Yes, I'm there.
So, Chair, that letter, which is dated the 2nd of February 2010, it reads, "We refer to our previous correspondence regarding the above and advise that we have consulted with a senior member of our client, the ANC, MEC Michael Mabuyakulu, who at the material time was the provincial treasurer of the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal. We are instructed to convey to you the following. 1, that in his capacity as the provincial treasurer at the time, Mabuyakulu authorized the receipt of the 1 million rand donation from ANC member Mr. Sipho Shabalala. 2, that he wishes to place on record that such a donation was received in cash and was verified to be 1 million rand. And 3, that he, Mabuyakulu, further authorized the funds to be utilized for various purposes related to the KwaZulu-Natal ANC Provincial Conference that was held between 20th and 22nd June 2008. Chair, so effectively, Mr. Mabuyakulu says we received the money. It's not quite the 1,053,000, but it's now been rounded to a 1 million rand. And he says it was received, and it was received in cash.
Now, he also deposed to an affidavit dealing with this, and that's at page 1854. If we could deal with that first.
I'm sorry, I missed that. I was still looking at this letter from Ngubane.
Sorry, I just want to check I have the reference right. I think it's SW16.
Chair, it was correct at 1854 page.
At page 1854.
Same exhibit?
It's exhibit D.
D.
Yes.
What page?
1854.
1854.
Yes. And if you could deal with 1855 from paragraph 5 so that the chair can see what it is that was said.
Paragraph 5, Mr. Mabuyakulu's affidavit reads as follows.
I'm sorry. Oh no, I'm looking at 1984. You said 1854.
1854, and then at 1855, Chair.
Yes, this is Mr. Mabuyakulu's affidavit. Yes.
So if
What
you could-
paragraph at 1?
Paragraph
855.
5, at 6 and 7 first.
Yes.
Paragraph 5, it reads as follows. During my tenure as provincial treasurer, I was inter alia responsible for fundraising for the ANC. During 2005, I made the call to to the ANC leadership and members to fundraise on behalf of the ANC. The funds were required for the ANC's day-to-day administration and for the ANC provincial conference, which was to take place at Ndumiso Training College during June 2008. I recall that Mr. Sipho Shabalala was one of those who undertook to raise funds on behalf of the ANC. Prior to the conference, he informed me he had fundraised and wished to pay funds to the ANC. I do not recall the exact date that he informed me of this, but I believe it was approximately 2 months or so before the provincial conference. Thereafter, I received payment from Mr. Shabalala in the amount of 1 million rand. To the best of my recollection, I received the funds from Shabalala on or about 11 June 2008. The funds were received shortly before the provincial conference. I was still the ANC provincial treasurer at the time. I confirm that it is not the ANC's policy to disclose where private donations are received from, nor is it our policy to disclose how the funds were spent or dispersed. These are private matters and not in the public domain. I can overstate that the funds were used by me to defray expenses arising from the then upcoming June 2008 conference. The funds were used by me in my capacity as provincial treasurer at the time.
And then at paragraph 12 on page 1858, he refers to the letter from Nkopani Wills Incorporated dated the 2nd of February 2010, which you have already dealt with. What does he say about that?
Chair, paragraph 12 at the bottom of page 1858, he states, all ANC leaders were requested to raise funds. I wish to clarify the statement. Buyakulu authorized the receipt of the 1 million rand donation. Mr. Shabalala informed me that he had received funds and he wished to pay these over as reported in paragraph 6 above. I do not know how and where Mr. Shabalala raised funds. I only learnt of the funds when Mr. Shabalala informed me that he had funds to pay over to the ANC. When he informed me of the funds, it was arranged that I would meet him to receive them from him, and duly did so at the date set out above. I did not specifically authorize the receipt of specific funds, but fundraising in general. I confirm that the funds were received in cash and were used by me to defray certain of the expenses of the conference as stated above.
Now, in the course of your investigations, did you have an opportunity to examine the books and records of the ANC and determine whether these funds were recorded in their books and records?
I did, Chair. While we didn't have the detailed records behind the financial statements, the financial manager of the ANC at the time, while he initially provided a statement saying the money was received, he subsequently withdrew that statement and said there was no knowledge, he had no knowledge of the money being received, no receipt was issued, and it wasn't accounted for in the ANC records.
And Chair, if I can refer you to those two affidavits now. The one is dated the 4th of May 2009 and appears at page 1843.
1843
in the same bundle, Chair.
Yes.
So this is the 4th of May 2009. And what did he say in that affidavit?
So in the second paragraph he says, in the course of my duties I confirm that a donation of 1 million rand was received by the African National Congress from a donor who I'm advised was a certain Dr. Savoy. And in paragraph 3, Mr. Sipho Shabalala had advised the organization that such a donation had been made, and when the money was requested, Mr. Shabalala brought the money to our offices in cash.
Now, if we can look at page 1845, and just more than a year later...
Well, he does also say in paragraph 4, he was aware that the money was utilized to pay for various to pay various service providers for items related to the Provincial Congress held in August 2008.
Yes, Chair, I apologize for
Yes.
omitting that. Okay, now, little more than a year later, on the 30th of August 2010, on page
So this was, I'm sorry, this was 2009 when
4 May
he
2009.
deposed to this affidavit.
Yes. And now we have a year later, the 30th of August 2010, on page 1845. What did he then say?
So, Chair, effectively what he now says is that that statement that he signed was prepared by Ngubani Will's attorneys. It was just brought to him, he signed it, and he didn't have knowledge of it. He then goes on to say that, and if I can refer to page 1846 at paragraph 7.2, where it states, a few weeks later I received a call from Miss S. Ngubani Wills Incorporated advising me that there's a matter under investigation by the South African Police Service's commercial crime relating to donations received by the ANC KZN. She had further advised that she is acting for ANC KZN in the matter, and she asked me to sign an affidavit that she had prepared giving the circumstances of the donation. So, Chair, he then, in the following page at 1847, the affidavit's badly written because he effectively answers questions that had been sent to him, Chair. But in B, under paragraph 8, he states, I have no personal knowledge of the answer required. These questions must be directed to the lawyer who prepared the affidavit on my behalf. And then C, I was informed by Mr. Mabaya Kulu I have no personal knowledge and details of the donation used to pay for the items not paid for by the officers of the ANC KZN. The question can be directed to Mr. Mabuya Kulu, save for the last paragraph where I explain how the statement was commissioned. On 29 August 2009, I received an email attached an affidavit from Ms. S. Ngubani, and she told me to have it signed and commissioned, and I took it to the Broad Street Police Station. And then D, I have no idea. I did not investigate this matter. I have no knowledge. My sources are Mr. Mabuya Kulu and the lawyer. And then E, on the last page, I therefore request to withdraw the initial affidavit which was provided to me to sign. So effectively, he distances himself from the first affidavit, which he didn't prepare, and he distances himself from the facts contained therein.
Yeah, but this is somebody who has a BCom degree, BCom accounting. He's a financial manager. He is told that the affidavit he is being asked to sign is connected with police investigation. Clearly, he's going to have a look at that affidavit carefully before he takes an oath and signs it. Did he ever explain that part to you, how he could have signed such an affidavit knowing that this was connected with police investigations? Even if it wasn't connected with police investigations, how could he just sign such an affidavit without understanding that he was misrepresenting the position, at least as far as he was concerned?
Chair, it's inexplicable. There's
Yes.
no justification for what
Yes.
he did.
Yes.
And it appears that many, for want of a better word, junior people in these different organizations
Yes.
just did what they were told
Yes.
without thinking of the potential consequences.
Yes, but at least that's what he should be saying. He should be saying in the second affidavit, this This is how it came about. This is what I was told. I signed because of this and that, but to just say that it's an affidavit that was prepared by somebody else and was given to you and you signed, because when he says that, he wants us to believe that when he signed that affidavit, he didn't know what it was saying. Because if he knew what it was saying, the question is, how did you take an oath and depose to it if what it was saying was not true?
Chair, I agree. And it's not like it's a thick
Yeah.
affidavit, it's a few lines.
And it's possible that it was not true what was there and he knew it, but maybe there was some pressure, he was scared, I don't know, but he doesn't say that. It seems in his second affidavit to say, look, I didn't think I had a choice, and I've had time to reflect on this. Now I'm changing my mind.
I agree, Chair.
Yes. Okay.
Chair, he also says in paragraph 3 on page 1845 that as a financial manager, my duties and responsibilities involve financial management and bookkeeping. And when we receive donations, we follow ANC internal processes. But we know as a matter of fact from Mr. White's examination of the ANC's books and records that there's no reference to this donation he previously said had been received. And surely it would have been the purview of the duties he says himself he had, that it should have been recorded.
Did Mr. Savoy explain why in his company's records he reflected that this payment to these attorneys was for legal services if it was for a donation?
Chair, he just went to say it was wrong and it was corrected. In a review of his records, I noted that initially it was accounted for as legal services, and it was subsequently changed sometime later to reflect that it was a donation. So, Chair, it appears that the initial attempt was to hide what it actually was.
Yes. And the question is, why would they hide it if it was a donation?
So, Chair, there would be no, if it was a donation that wasn't as a repayment for receiving work. So if it was just a donation, there would be no
Yes.
need to hide it.
Yes.
But the problem with this donation is it was actually linked to irregularly being awarded a contract for some
Yeah.
50 million rand.
Yes. Now, yeah, but the point is, if it was a genuine donation, a bona fide donation, then there was nothing to hide. You hide it if you feel that it's wrong because it's connected with what you have just got.
Chair, I agree. And also, if it was a genuine donation, you would expect it to be recorded as such, but also paid to the entity you're donating to. You
Yes.
pay via
Yes, attorneys who
Trust
send you
accounts.
an invoice that says it's for legal services. Well, maybe he will be able to explain, or some of the implicated persons will be able to explain some of the things that don't seem to make sense at this stage. Thank you.
And Mr. White, if you can just remind the Chair, at this stage, what was Mr. Mabayo Kulu's position in the ANC?
Why is it difficult to say Mabuya Kulu? It's
Chair-
so simple.
I know, Chair. You know, unfortunately, and it's a mark of our past.
Yeah, but because I'm sure all of you, if I say Honolulu, you will say Honolulu. So why can't you say Mabuya Kulu?
Very, very sadly, it is inexplicable, but I find it terribly difficult to get myself around a lot of the words and even the spelling, because I never learnt an African language, and it's a travesty, and I'm terribly embarrassed by it. And every time I have to say a name, I am blushing inside and feeling terribly shy.
I can understand. I can understand when it comes to certain words, but I just see Mabuya Kulu as so easy, and also the only alphabet you seem to have a problem pronouncing is U. This is not like certain names and surnames that could really be seen as difficult. It's U, Honolulu, Mabuya Kulu.
I know. It is a cause of huge embarrassment to me, Chair.
Okay, all right.
It really is.
Thank you.
An actual humiliation more than embarrassment.
Well, I can tell you, I have names that I struggle that are not my in my language myself, you know. But the only point I'm making here is I was trying to understand, because it seems to me that it should be easy. Otherwise, I do accept that when it's not your language, there could be names that you can struggle to pronounce. You know, it happens with me in regard to languages that are not my own. Yes, but that's fine. Let's continue.
What was Mr. Mabayonkulu's? I hope it was slightly better.
I give up.
What was his position in the ANC?
Chair, Mr. Maboyakulu.
That was much better.
Position, he was the provincial treasurer in KwaZulu-Natal.
And what was his position in the department?
So, Chair, his political position was, he wasn't in the administration, but he was the MEC of Traditional Affairs
He was
and
the
Local
political
Government.
head of the department.
Correct, Chair.
And what was his involvement in this contract?
So, Chair, he was, a number of the documents passed his desk, for want of a better word, in the lead up. So I've referred to documents relating to the transfer of the money from the Poverty Alleviation Fund. There were memos prepared that, amongst others, came to him. So he knew that the project was happening. He opened it when the first one was installed. So it's not that he didn't know about Intaka and what it was about.
Yes.
Chair, I've now, if we have regard to the diagram at Annexure TSW 19, dealt with the one side of the investigation, and that is into the procurement of the water purification plants by the Department of Traditional Affairs and Local Government. The other side of the investigation involved the procurement by the Department of Health in KwaZulu-Natal for both water purification plants. I find difficulties with some English words, and also with oxygen, self-generating oxygen plants and some dialysis machines. Chair, it is 4 o'clock, and I'm going to need some time to also explain those transactions. Would it be an appropriate time to take an adjournment?
How long do you estimate we might need to finish with Mr. White?
Chair, I am hoping to finish his evidence by lunchtime tomorrow, and then the afternoon, the 2 remaining witnesses should be short. I don't believe they should be more than an hour each.
Okay, all right. Mr. White, I take it that you were warned that you could be in that seat for 2.5 days.
I was, Chair.
Yeah. Okay, all right. We are going to adjourn for the day, and we'll start at 10 o'clock tomorrow.
Thank
We
you, Chair.
adjourn.
All rise.
Please, Chair, your turn.
Yeah, you do.